Beneficent, the Merciful, may his peace and blessings be upon our Prophet Muhammad and upon his holy, sinless, infallible progeny. Dear viewers, brothers and sisters in faith in the Walayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, welcome to the Convertsation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In this program, you can join me, Daniel Pizer, and my co-host Shaykh Yahya as we discuss the daily struggles, issues, and challenges faced by converts to the religion of Islam. In this episode, we will continue our Ramadan series, in which we are talking about the convert experience during the holy month of Ramadan. In the previous episodes, we discussed issues dealing with loneliness, or Ramadan blues, I guess you could call it, that sometimes affect converts and new Muslims, not just in the beginning of their experience or their journey in the religion of Islam and the walayat of the Imams of Ahlul-Bayt, peace be upon them all, but also sometimes long after conversion. In part, this can also be because our families and the holiday season is something that normally you, inshallah, get to enjoy with your family. And for many converts, if we come from Christian or Jewish backgrounds, have holiday seasons that we associate with belonging and being with family and spending time with family, and different aspects of those that we mark with our families. And it's something that many of us lose once we convert to the religion of Islam. It's a sacrifice. Or sometimes we gain those holidays, but we also have some new holidays to celebrate. However, Ramadan can be one of those more difficult times, and that's particularly at the times that we're opening and breaking the fast. And I don't know, I guess when I think about it, one of the groups of people that I feel sort of the worst for are those people who converted because, we have, it never ceases to amaze me the rapid pace of technological development and how much people encounter religion on the internet or other things like that. So if someone is living in a rural community somewhere and they encounter the religion of Islam, they may be able to go through much of the basics of conversion just through using internet resources. But during holidays like Ramadan, this is a very difficult time for people in that position. Certainly it's a month in which we stress the importance of patience, and that's something that goes a long way if you can cultivate that during this time, if you happen to be someone in a situation like that. But one of the things I hope we can focus on a little bit is how people who are in that position, who don't have Muslim communities around them, or even if maybe they would have to drive a very great distance, or even that's not an option, what they're supposed to do. I mean, there's difficulties either way if you're in that situation, in terms of marriage or even halal food or other things. Sure. But that can definitely, Ramadan can really hit home, all of those things sometimes at once. So I guess with your permission, I think we could spend a little bit of time at least on that subject, and there's plenty of other things we can discuss as well. But that time seems like a good opportunity for them to really delve a lot more into Quran and into the lives of the Ahlul-Bayt, peace be upon them all. And but beyond that, let's say you're someone like me who comes from not just a relatively rural area. I mean, I come from a rural state. When I think after I converted, my parents had moved to a much more rural area. But you wake up and you're trying to find clothes that don't have dog hair on them to pray in, or find some kind of food that's not been in contact with some other source of haram or najasat or something like that. And that alone is difficult. And then the rest of the day, people are eating around you and doing whatever else. Yeah. And then at the end of the day, you break the fast, and it's a big achievement for you, but to everyone else, it just sort of seems like, why would you do that in the first place?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I can remember a few shocking things in the month of Ramadan that happened to me, especially in the transition between I initially converted when I was at high school. When I joined uni, I originally was at university studying my first year of legal studies, which was a preliminary to law. I remember I had Muslim friends who I met at the Islamic Society meetings, and some of them I had known prior to even converting, but we knew each other through our parents, and I didn't realize they were Muslim. I didn't take an interest in their faith until I met them at the Islamic Society university meetings. Of course, at this time I was still following the distorted form of Islam known as Sunnism, and converted to proper Islam yet. And I remember one time in the holy month of Ramadan, I was walking down the street, and it's a very narrow kind of university area, and I saw my friend, I wouldn't want to mention a name, but it's a particular person I have in my head. And I saw him, and from a distance I thought to myself, oh, and I waved and I said, Assalamu alaikum. And then I remember him getting very awkward, and I kind of reflected on why is he getting awkward, and then I realized 2 minutes later that of course he'd be awkward. When I saw him, he had a giant Subway sandwich in his hand and was eating away on it. So
Other than the tuna sub, I'm assuming, or what?
other than the tuna sub, number one, and number two during daylight hours, right? So there was a degree of awkwardness which I felt when I was in Scotland, which was, not only do I have a relatively closed cultural community, but on top of that, many of the youths who are my peers, due to the fact that many of them have not been given adequate teaching about Islam, themselves are not actually practicing that much. That being said, when I initially made the conversion from Sunnism to Shiism while still living in Scotland, I remember that when I became isolated towards just my house and keeping my practice to myself during the month of Ramadan, there was somewhat of a spiritual growth, in the sense that because I was isolated and did not have a Shi'i community there full stop, I was not left with a negative impression of the Shi'i community. So I still had this hope of being a believer isolated from the other believers geographically, but somehow I would be able to eventually one day move towards the Shia community in a bigger city. Now, of course, I did move to London, as you know, for Hausa purposes. When I moved to London, unfortunately, I had to deal with the reality that our community is not a very embracing one. And I think very much so that those believers who do live in isolated areas, to some degree, can retain their spirituality through not having to deal with a painful reality that is the closed-minded nature and lack of hospitality that exists, unfortunately. And I don't think this is necessarily caused by selfishness. I believe when you are an ethnic minority of a minority faith practicing in a country in which most people do not belong to your community, it has naturally not been your instinct to invite other people towards your house unless they happen to come from the same ethnic community as you. However, what I'm saying to the community here is, now since we live in such a global era, an era in which information is available to people at their fingertips, an era in which people are taking an interest in Islam, people are coming to the masjids, people are converting to Shiism, why not try your best to chase up these individuals, ensure that they are being looked after, ensure that they do not feel loneliness. Think of it, I always have said that a key rule which would allow us to grow together as a community is just as if we applied the golden rule, namely, treat others in a way you would like to be treated yourself. If you found yourself isolated as a student, for example, in a city in which everyone else might have been the same faith as you, but was from a different ethnic community and were there with your families, would you not hope that they would reach out for you and try and welcome you into their circle and treat you in the way that a believer is expected to treat another believer? And I think that very much is where our community lacks.
So in a sense that they can learn from the migrant experience itself, and because what people, when they join the religion of Islam, are doing in a very big sense is a type of migration.
Absolutely.
It's perhaps or probably the biggest migration that they'll do in their entire life.
Sure.
So yeah, in that sense, I think it's fair to look and say that if you felt isolation in the process of migration to whatever country in the West that you're settled in now, or whatever else in terms of religious isolation, that can certainly serve as a positive impetus, let's say.
Absolutely. Ignorance is to some degree bliss as well, to go back to my point about the fact that converts who are isolated from a community and have not yet experienced their lack of action can also sustain their iman for a much longer duration.
Well, it's not too dissimilar from, as we mentioned in one previous episode, outside of the Arba'in experience here, unfortunately, once you exit the Haramain, sometimes even inside of it, Karbala can be a very different place, But people have an image of this, that they need to hang on to. And I imagine it's very similar for Hajj, which inshallah I'll have the opportunity to do that someday.
Inshallah ta'ala, may Allah bless all the mu'mineen with the ability to go and have their sins cleansed on Hajj.
So I think that...
We're all in desperate need of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that which actually another aspect when you talk about it at some point, inshallah, is sort of the redemptive aspects of Shahr Ramadan. But for converts in that sense, yeah, I think you're right, that if your view of communities is one in which everything is very happy and nice and you get together and worship and no one ever disagrees, and I mean even without the convert part in the equation, that the dynamics are sort of sound and content in those communities, then it can be certainly kind of a rude awakening when you actually join one or move to a location where you can.
Sure.
Now we have actually in our fiqh and our narrations emphasis on living near urban areas as opposed to living in rural areas, because you can access scholars or access religious law or religious communities.
It's a general trend.
In a better way. Now that we have the internet, I'm not going to say that this is a substitute for a community, but there's certainly some virtual sense of community you can achieve.
Every time I've been dependent on the internet as my community, both prior to encountering the Sunni community as well as the Shia community, I must admit that my spiritual growth and the kind of iman booster you get, the kind of enthusiasm that drains your body, that kind of enthusiasm we both had when we first converted, but we'd spend nights just reading books. It's there a lot more than it is once you encounter the community. And I believe that this is partially because you have such a high expectation of a community. The bar is set very high, and then the bar is set by the akhlaq of the Ahlul Bayt. And when you encounter the community, sometimes your expectations just go down the drain. And it can put you on a bit of a downer. I have several words of advice for the convert during the month of Ramadan, which I believe certainly helped me in many ways. One of them is you have to realize that sometimes, even though there are good English speakers coming to your community, sometimes they're not the kind of speaker you want to listen to, and sometimes they're not the most charismatic speaker. Therefore, you will not benefit from the community program. And sometimes, again, being around the community, seeing how quickly you're dismissed, seeing how everyone else sits in cliques and just abandons you, might sometimes put you on a bit of a downer, and it might be more detrimental to your faith to even show up to such gatherings. As a result, I believe that since we have access to the internet, if people familiarize themselves with the speakers who they found most attractive to them, speakers who are speaking about the true Islam, who are not doing beautification of Islamic topics by glossing them over with non-Islamic topics, those things, then they should download their speeches from those particular years. Normally you can download each Ramadan night's majlis one night after it's uploaded. Normally one night after it's given, it will be uploaded online. You can download such majalis, and you can benefit in that sense from hearing a speaker who you are attracted to, and feel that you have that Ramadan message where every day something new is coming towards you. Again, cultivating a relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal, particularly with the Imam of your time, we have to bear in mind that the Imam is seeing what the community is doing during the month of Shahr Ramadan. The Imam is sharing with our communal worship during the month of Shahr Ramadan. And indeed, the Imam shares in everything we do during this holy month. And through understanding this, through coming to know the Imam, namely through reading about him and through reading about the previous Imam, so we might understand the trend that our Imam will set, we will be able to cultivate that relationship. More importantly, a relationship with the Quran, the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, which was revealed firstly during the month of Ramadan, we are able to, as you yourself, Samata Sheikh, have recommended, compile notes with the tafsir of Ahlul Bayt and enter into a relationship with the Quran. And even if we are not doing some kind of tafsir type exercise, we can enter into a relationship with the Quran just by listening to an Arabic reciter and trying to recite in Arabic ourselves, trying to learn how to read the Quran, something definitely I would recommend to most converts. But I think specifically, during the month of Ramadan, converts should make a conscientious effort, because whilst we condemn the act of communal taraweeh as a bid'ah, an innovation, a disgusting innovation innovated by a disgusting tyrant after the death of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we at the same time recognize that that community, due to the fact they are attending taraweeh, are engaging with the Quran. Now, they may be engaging in a way with the Quran which unfortunately will not avail them, because it is an innovation at the end of the day.
And it's not one based on understanding Quran, it's based on one just getting in enough verses per night.
But what I mean is, it cultivates an atmosphere of the Quran nonetheless.
Sure, there's a relationship, absolutely.
So what I would suggest to the believer in Shia is that within your house, do not necessarily only listen to latmiyat, eulogies and the like. Also try and download the Holy Quran. Devote time to attempt to, namely, find Qur'an or reciters who you find are attractive to you, reciters who you find you like their style. More importantly, the du'as which are in the treasures of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. We have the du'a for Shahr Ramadan in Sahifa Sajadiyya of Imam Zain al-Abidin.
And most of these you can access on du'as.org.
Exactly. There's a nice English translation. And you can download a nice audio recitation so that you might try and copy the method of reciting this du'a for those who find it difficult to read the Arabic text. And there are numerous things we can do during this holy month, but I think it's all about cultivating our relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal. My main recommendation is for converts, as well as even born Muslims, to stay away from online forums, things like Pal Talk, things like Twitter, for all they do is cause either fitna, a backbiting, disputes between your own brothers, and more importantly, if they don't cause those things, they end up descending into pathetic jokes and pathetic worldly discussions such as what I've done this Ramadan. The month of Ramadan is not about you telling other people what you have been doing. It is a month between you and Allah Azza wa Jal. It is a month where you are attempting to cultivate your relationship with our Creator. And so, to know what Bob or Ahmed or Ali or Abbas is doing during this holy month is not too important for your cultivation of your spirituality. And I speak to myself here the most, because up until about 2 years ago, I was a person that used to enter into these pathetic disputes online, and it's something I heavily regret and pray that Allah Azza wa Jal forgives me. But the trend I have learned since being in the house here in Karbala is that we need to dedicate the holy month of Ramadan to educating ourselves, cultivating our own relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal, and more importantly, if we can also, within communities, as I've said, conduct circles in which we try and avail and help and assist the spirituality of others. Be it mere small things, such as a small discussion group in which people take one hadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and try and extract the obvious meanings of these narrations. And when we say these things, we don't mean a theological narration in which the Imam is describing the attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal, or he's describing the attributes of the Imam, whether or not he knows the unseen, or whether or not the Imam is infallible in this dimension or that dimension. These are important discussions, but these are not discussions for the month of Ramadan, for they do not cultivate spirituality.
I have to cut you off there for a second. Respected viewers, we have to go to break. Inshallah, you'll join us afterwards. In the meantime, if you'd like to join the conversation, you can email us at the contact information posted on the screen. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the Convertsation. When we left off, we were discussing the subject of the holy month of Ramadan and how converts experience this, in particular those living in more isolated or remote areas who may have found or discovered the religion of Islam over the internet and this kind of thing. And Shaikh, you were giving some excellent advice about how to deal with this month.
Sure. Just to pick up where I was before we had to cut for a break, I was saying that it would be excellent for the believers who have time to give. And when we say who have time to give, we don't expect anyone in the community to give up their family obligations. We don't expect people to abandon the spirituality that they have at home with their family. For indeed, we appreciate that a believer has a very unique time with his family during the month of Ramadan. But that born believer who is born into a Muslim family and sees that there are people in the community, maybe students who are from born Muslim families, whose families are not present, maybe converts, if they can maybe dedicate once a week even, or maybe even twice a week, two times in a week, to holding study circles in which people discuss narrations. Now, we made clear that whilst we believe theological narrations are of the utmost importance in their own due given time, during the month of Ramadan, these are not the kind of discussions which would yield fruit. For certain, they yield heated discussions, which again would be contradictory to the spirituality which we wish to maintain and cultivate during the month of Ramadan. So we'd be talking about the kind of narrations where we have talking about the ethics or khalaqiyat of certain acts of ibadah. Narrations about Allah, from Allah Azza wa Jal, which talk about the fada'il or the merits of Shahr Ramadan as a month. What is special about this month? Narrations which talk about what the Imams used to do during these months, or even looking deeply at a dua which is from the Imam, which is to be recited during the month of Ramadan, and breaking that dua down segment by segment.
Yeah, some analysis of like dua iftitah or something.
Exactly. Extracting from these du'as benefits which could reap many benefits spiritually within a community. I believe doing such is extremely important. Even again, we talk about reaping a relationship with the Holy Quran. In order to cultivate that relationship, I believe it is necessary for the convert to have an understanding of what the Quran is saying. So again, if we would just have a small study circle, which might want to break down a few ayats every day, maybe quote some of the narrations of the Imams in regards to what these ayats are about, so that convert really feels he has a relationship with the Quran. We've mentioned on previous shows that the convert, he might pick up that translation, but picking up the translation of the Quran is not the same as having a relationship. As you said, when you picked up that book, Al-Qa'im fil Quran, of Sayyid Hashim al-Bahrani, I believe it is, we find that you were saying that you found, at least, that when you returned after reading that book to the Quran, you found you were reading it in a whole new light. Yeah, because naturally we believe that the Ahlul Bayt are those upon whose house the Quran was revealed, and therefore they are the best placed to explain the Holy Quran.
I think really understanding the Quran, or gaining some ma'rifah and some understanding of God, is something that you can only do by approaching through some wasila, and that is the Ahlul Bayt. There's no other entry point, no other gate, I think. And so for developing an understanding of Quran during the holy month of Ramadan, absolutely, I think, or any time, that it's you can't really beat their narrations. And the important thing even is not just to simply understand them, it's the struggle in trying to understand them. I guess what I mean is it's that process of wrestling with a text and trying to understand things in it that are difficult aspects about it that help that relationship develop. But when I was talking about people who were very isolated, let me give you an example. So there's someone else that I know of from my home state of Vermont. As much as I'm a New Yorker now, or like to think of myself that way, I guess, at least I'm still a Vermonter. So it's a very rural area for the most part. The whole state has, now I don't know, maybe it's 650 or 600,000 people, but when I was growing up it was probably, I remember it this way, I remember the year that the human population surpassed the cow population. Wow. There. Literally. This is not just for comic value, I'm mentioning this. So, for someone like this person that I know of in my home state, who lives with, I believe, his grandparents, who are very religious Christians, who are not fond of the fact that he's adopted the religion of Islam, and who happens to live in a very remote area of the state, even by rural standards.
Wow.
And does not get to encounter, real-life Muslims that much.
Sure.
And is probably the only one that many people in that area will ever meet. Now, he's very well-read, but
Is he open about his Islam with many people?
as far as I know, yeah.
Sure.
And he's
He's a believer in the true Islam.
Yes, yeah, I get hadith a day things on WhatsApp from him of different narrations from HOTBIRD and this kind of thing. Yeah. So, for someone in his position who's taking care of his grandparents, who are also maybe hostile to some extent to his beliefs, any time of year is difficult, but of course a time like Ramadan is probably going to be more difficult. And I can tell you why too. When I watched, even having been to communities, but when I would watch initially videos of majalis or other things like this during Ramadan, and you hear the audience give a really loud salawat or something like that, you have never had that experience of being in an audience of saying Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad with anyone other than just yourself. And it's a really kind of, I don't want to say disheartening, but it's a sorrowful thought, I think, on some level, that walayat is something, the walayat of Ahlul Bayt is something that's there's a very social aspect to that's required. So even in that position, I mean, even now if I go home and it happens to be during Muharram or something else, which lately has sort of coincided with holiday season in the U.S. between Thanksgiving or Christmas or other things, and I watch lectures online, it's nice, but man, it really makes me miss the community experience that I would have. So for someone in that position who's limited financially in terms of their means to relocate, and maybe even to travel very much, or who has dependents, and at the same time, the people in his household are not particularly partial to his faith and very, I guess muta'assib would say, very like biased.
Partisan.
Partisan in favor of their own religion. I've been wondering a lot, if I were in this person's position, how is Ramadan going to look for me? That I have to wake up and I have to deal with all the usual stuff, or trying to find work, or I'm not sure what he does for work now, but we're going through all of that and being viewed somewhat strangely, even though Vermont is historically an incredibly tolerant state. We actually have a Muslim population, more than probably a lot of other places in the Northeast, I would imagine, just in one particular city where we have a lot of refugee resettlement efforts. But not really, there's no Shia center.
Sure.
I keep coming back to sort of, if I had some kind of advice, what would I be able to give? Or if you had some kind of advice, what would you be able to give?
Well, to some degree, I can appreciate how the brother would feel, because in the first year of my conversion, I remember my family were particularly a lot more hostile with me. I believe that they were under the impression that if they took a very head-on confrontational approach with me, this would kind of either see if it would make or break my Islam, because naturally they believed it was going to be a phase. And so one of the best ways to break someone from a phase is to make clear to them that you're not happy with it and it's got to end now. And if you leave someone with the impression that they have no choice in abandoning that phase, then often if it is just a phase, they will be the quickest to abandon it because it didn't mean that much to them in the first place. Unfortunately, I knew that Islam was not a phase for me. In fact, if anything, as I've explained, given the time period in which I converted to Islam, given that it was the year after 9/11, if anything, I did not want to believe Islam was true. I wanted to believe that Islam was some fake religion and just shun it to the side because it would make my life 10 times more difficult to believe in Islam. Yet I was confronted with this very aggressive approach particularly by my father. And as a result, I can remember how it felt to be constantly under the pressure of not being allowed out late, getting told off by my mother if I would say that I'm going to some community program, having to occasionally make up tales for where I'm going in order to not be seen as someone else going to the mosque constantly, which
is amazing. It's not like you're going out to score crack in the middle of the night or something like that.
Which surprisingly may have even been more desired at that time by my family than me going to a masjid.
Exactly what I mean.
So, one of the ways I was able to appreciate this, and I think it helps, particularly when you follow the Islam as was revealed by God, namely the Islam that includes the Ahlul Bayt, is to appreciate that just as you are suffering, the community of early believers also suffered. So I used to relate to the struggles of people like Bilal, rahmatullah alayhi, the first caller to prayer of the Holy Prophet, the first Mu'adhin. And I used to appreciate the struggles of people such as him, and also the struggles that the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi endured himself.
With his own community.
Absolutely, where he'd have people throwing stones at him. And at some point was so economically isolated and exiled into the valley of Abu Talib that it said they did not have food to eat, and he used to attach rocks to his stomach.
Yeah, hunger rocks, that's right.
Absolutely. So, if you can appreciate that the key figures of your religion have also suffered in the way of Allah Azza wa Jal, then it makes things easy to some degree, especially if you know that you're doing all of this for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. And again, this is a very beautiful message we can extract from the day of Ashura, where we have Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, Imam al-Hussein, the blessed possessor of this city that we're in today, where he tells Allah Azza wa Jal, after his baby son, Abdullah, the breastfed baby, is killed, he says, "Oh God, this is made slightly easier for me to take because I know that you are witnessing all of this." And so through appreciating that you're not on your own entirely, rather God is in control of the situation, Allah Azza wa Jal witnesses what you are going through, and as he says in the Holy Quran, he does not burden a soul beyond that which it can take, helps in appreciating the situation.
I think, one of the things that's really beautiful about fasting, particularly during the holy month of Ramadan, is that people around you notice the difference that has, the impact that makes on you. I would have friends tell me, you seem much calmer, you seem much more patient, you seem like you're much better able to sort of accept things as they come, to roll with the punches. And I think looking back, it's true, because at the most basic level, maybe you just don't have the energy to waste on petty things anymore, and that even someone in a more isolated position like that inshallah their family will see the same benefits that come from that sacrifice in the way of God. And maybe even that over the course of several or many Ramadans, that the family, people like that, will be drawn more to the religion of Islam because they'll see the effect of that month and some of its benefits in the behavior of their relatives or other things like this. And also, like I said, it's a good time to work on patience.
Definitely.
I think, the nice thing about living in a rural area, of course, is that for me, in some ways, I've always thought it was more easier, it's wonderful English there. I always felt like it was a lot easier to connect with divinity, I guess.
Because of the whole nature thing going on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's easier for me when I can look up at night and actually see stars instead of just light pollution. And
Skyscrapers.
and you know, in Brooklyn there's not as many skyscrapers, but sure. I actually think the city view is really beautiful. There's you know, some nice places you can go to watch the sunset over parts of the city, and it's it can be a really beautiful experience. But it is one nice aspect if you happen to experience the holy month of Ramadan in some setting where you can more appreciate creation around you and not simply things that appear to be man-made everywhere.
That certainly helped me in my first years of Scotland. Naturally, because I lived in a relatively nice area of Scotland, within, say, maximum 15-minute walk from my house, there was a very nice forest area. And I used to find that, especially, I can't compare the heat of the Scottish sun to anything we experience here in the Middle East, but especially, for example, when you want to get out of the house.
The Scottish sun produces heat? This is news to me.
Barely. We try and chisel the ice off its heart first. And, just in the light of the sun, really, as opposed to the heat of it. I used to like to just walk in the forest and go into the shade, because naturally all these trees shading you from, and just take a walk with my tasbih and try and meditate over the whole situation of Shahr Ramadan. Now, of course, this was all fun and joy when I was unemployed and was able to do so. I mean, I was still a university student at that time, right? But unfortunately, most people have to work. Fortunately, both of us are lucky enough to work from home with kind of stuff we have to do here with studies. But if you're at a 9-to-5 job, it's slightly more difficult to enjoy with the fast of Ramadan.
We have a few minutes left, so maybe we'll actually should cover, at least in part of another episode, what sort of the whole work-Ramadan relationship. But what I would say for my own part, briefly I guess, is that for me, if anything, working tended to make the difficulties of the month anyway, easier in some ways. Now, I guess it depends on the type of work that you do. Even mine was in, an office setting, working in like a therapeutic environment with people. And I have to say, I worried a lot that I would sort of not be able to help people at the usual level.
Or be as patient.
100%.
Or be as patient as you'd like to be.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I found it really the blessings were numerous and very much in the opposite direction, that I may be more patient with my patients, or other things like this. So there are actually a lot of benefits to it, and in terms of the hunger part, you don't necessarily notice it much, even when coworkers seem to invite you out to lunch a lot more often during that month, or maybe it just seems that way. But even in that sense, it's if you don't have to look very hard during that month, even as a convert, with all the difficulties or challenges, to find the blessings. And I think, or at least I have to believe on some level, that the challenges that may be more numerous or more difficult that you face, that the reward that you receive in that month is much bigger. But the trick is just not letting yourself drift to a point or fall into kind of the blues, I guess you could say, of feeling disconnected, because that I think is sort of the worst possible thing that can happen during a month like that, is when someone feels like, I don't feel connected with the month, it doesn't seem special to me because I don't have a community to celebrate it with, or because that community I don't feel as welcome in. And that is really disappointing.
I fear that one of the largest symptoms that converts can engage with, when I say converts, I even mean here, from my own experience, friends who have family that are not religious and not practicing, and then they get religious themselves. So again, we can classify them as converts here, is they seek out religious activity online, and as I said, it's often debate type stuff. And this, especially our aqidah is
people
very
don't
important
behave
to
the
us.
same way online that they would behave in person.
Our aqidah is very important to us, so I don't blame them for wanting to carry out these actions, but I'm telling you that such actions are not healthy to your religiosity, rather they're extremely detrimental.
Yeah, especially in a formative situation, and especially during Ramadan.
During Ramadan especially, however, I would argue that this is even a general trend. One should not even engage in it.
After years of experience that myself, I would be inclined to agree. It's not worth it. If you can find people to discuss things with privately,
person.
even online if it's privately or something like this, okay, fine.
Sure.
But in person, yeah, people pay more attention to the way they carry themselves in person. They don't let
And
themselves
and
get
if you
away
can
with
see that the person's being aggressive and stubborn, it's best even in person. You can observe this straight away, and you can say, "I'm sorry. It's probably best we don't continue this conversation. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Ma salam."
Speaking of which, that's all the time we have for this episode of The Convertsation. Inshallah, we'll perhaps be able to continue some of this over future episodes. Thank you once again for joining us. If you'd like to join in the conversation, you can email us at the contact information provided on screen. And we ask and pray from both of us here that you have a successful month of Ramadan, and that the blessings for you in this month are numerous, and that the benefits that you come away with stay with you through the entire year. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.